In 1995, there was really no term instinctual types. They were called subtypes. Now, why was that? Well, I'm going to get into that. It's really important because Ichazo had the instincts, which were the three centers, and then Naranjo was calling them subtypes because they were variations on those three centers. And then tritype is similar to Tryfix. However, I'm going to show you some communication I've had recently where Ichazo used Tryfix as just the three centers. It was a term he liked. So he wasn't referencing initially that you have one in each center. So, for example, there are disparate views, but if you've heard the words instinctual drives, that has been around. Subtypes, Naranjo. Instincts, Ichazo. Instinctual drives, that could be any of us putting those words together. Instinctual types, instinctual variants. Remember, Don and Rusty had to come up with instinctual variants because they'd already used the word subtypes, defining the wing types. So all those from here on out, I'm going to call the instinctual types and the instinctual subtypes. And when I'm talking about the instinctual types, I'm talking about the three drives: self-pres, social, and sexual. And when I talk about the subtypes, I'm talking about the 27 different combinations, or the three variables within each type. So just putting it into reference, we did not have the internet or information on the internet. There were some who'd already started with the internet in 1995, but it's such a specific level. The average person did not have a laptop. I mean, I don't even know if they fully existed at that time. You had to have the full-on computer. And you couldn't get the information. Now we can search for that information. Like if I wanted to do the history of the Enneagram, I could just start searching. But what I found now is there is too much information that is redundant. So if you studied with me, for example, you might talk about the types in one way. And if you studied with Dawn and Russ, you might use the word variant, etc. So you can really see someone's background by the term they used. But if we really want to use the correct term as it originated, it would be subtypes. I just differentiate the two because that's what Naranjo was doing. He was giving those three variations of the type. So what did Ichazo mean? Ichazo meant that his system, where he took the Enneagram symbol of movement, the one we used, Gurdjieff used, and he used, it's because of Oscar that we use that symbol. Because Oscar used it differently than the way it was used by Gurdjieff. Some of the things overlapped because it is the law of 3 and 7 coming together, the hex edge shape and the triangle and the circle. It's all very critical. So here's the question: is this correct? Because Ichazo called them instincts and drives, and he had the term enneagons as well as enneagram. So he amped up the term enneagons, but actually it's still the enneagram symbol regardless. And whether you have that particular symbol, it just means 9-pointed, or you have the symbol like I use for the tritypes, or the full symbol where every type connects to every other type, there's still 9 key points. Now, what am I trying to say here? Is this correct? Yes and no. So let's explore the differences. So Ichazo's Enneagram was focused on the instincts, these visceral ways in which we saw the world, based on our relationship to our mother, our father, and our siblings, and how those experiences were. Now, at this time, it was believed that psychology was the way to go. So when did this all begin? It was 1970. And in 1970, the field was opening up to the importance of psychology, that everything wasn't genetics. It was psychology, what we experienced in our early childhood. Now we've since learned with all the brain science that a lot of it is definitely genetic, and then other parts are the environment, how well we do, how resilient we are, as I've mentioned before. So if we look at it, let's just begin with what I knew about Naranjo. In 1970, Naranjo and others underwent intensive training with Ichazo in Chile, Arica, Chile, including both the Enneagram and the instinctual subtypes. But I was wrong, because the subtypes weren't in that original training. And the kind of the passions and fixations really came about after that training. The entire training was working with what type you were. So I had done a whole research study, and this is what I thought was true. But if we don't get the information from someone that was actually there, we can make these mistakes. So here was my error. Then I had, between 1971 and 73, Naranjo formed the original SAT groups, Seekers After Truth, in Berkeley, California, and began incorporating the Enneagram in his own teaching. Now that is true. It's just, what was he incorporating? In 1996, after more than 20 years, Naranjo again taught the Enneagram in the United States in Boulder, Colorado. And this is when I had the opportunity to attend a training with him. And this was meaningful because I was already certified in 3 schools, Palmer Daniels, Riso Hudson, and Hurley Donson, and attended anything and everything I possibly could. Wherever they'd have me, I went, Enneagram speaking, because I wanted to know as much as I could know from my own point of view, rather than another's point of view. And if the information was available, I wanted to get it. And then kind of understand it in my own way. What was really great about this intensive with Naranjo is that I just asked him if he would answer some questions, some basic things that the different schools of thought disagreed on. So when I certified with Palmer and Daniels, it was stress and security. When I certified with Riso and Hudson, it was integration, disintegration. And the same with Hurley and Donson. And then I was finding it wasn't true. That how do we explain the high side of what's supposed to be our disintegrated self and our stress point, and vice versa? And so Naranjo immediately answered that and said that that was just an idea that he had. And he said, he just throws ideas against the wall, and if they stick, they're meaningful. And he said that he believed that same day he decided didn't stick. But he played with the arrows and thinking, would it be easier to go one direction in stress and another direction in security? And then that became common language. But it's not true. We do both. If we drop, if our type's in trouble, we use the lines of connection in the same manner. So if we're coming from the high side of 8, we'll also be coming from the line of 2 and 5, healthy, high. And if we're lower functioning and stressed out to the max, we would be in low 2 and low 5. We always take it with us. So I just want to say that very succinctly, because Ichazo never taught that, and Naranjo never intended to teach it. He just was discussing it in the study group. So let's just say that it was great to have Naranjo answer all these questions I had. And other people wanted those answers too. And I brought my subtypes book, the first body of research in the 27 types, subtypes rather, and gave it to him. Now, I did that for 2 reasons. One is I didn't want any more errors going around. I didn't want to say something that was incorrect and then have that disseminated the way integration disintegration was disseminated, and then cause these compound problems of people typing based on when they're, at their lowest level of functioning or their highest level of functioning. So I gave it to him, and actually the publisher of Enneagram Monthly had asked Naranjo, would you mind if he had someone write about the class? And that someone he wanted to write that article was Katherine. And can you please look at her subtype book? Because we all want to know more about the subtypes. So he had already been notified, so to speak, that I would be giving him something. I think I would have given it to him either way. As a scholar, I would have wanted still that answer and have the correct information. I want to make sure there were no misunderstandings on my part. So he took the subtype book and he agreed as a result of my book. So he looked at it, I guess, overnight, and then decided to teach the 27 subtypes in addition to the passions and the fixations. So according to Naranjo, 1996 was the first time he had ever taught the subtypes in their entirety. Now, what do we mean by that? He said that he had taught them in bits and pieces as they pertained to people that were in his SAT groups. So he did the SAT groups in Berkeley, because he has a house in Berkeley, and he used to be there every April, and he would do his writing, and then publish something, and usually do a talk on whatever he'd worked on. And that's how I first saw Naranjo. So what's key here to take away from this is that the instincts, not the way we use them, but the instincts, according to what the center represents of the instincts, came from Ichazo. And the 27 subtypes came from Naranjo. So I thought it might be helpful for you to see a letter of communication that I had last fall with Marc Sheehan. I just had a feeling that like Oscar wasn't doing well, and I just wanted to really clarify in writing from people who would actually know the date of Arica when that training began, and because there were 3 different dates people were using. I used 1970, but I could have been wrong. I know that Naranjo began teaching in Berkeley in 71 and weaving in the types because the types interfered with the quest for self-awareness and what's in the way of your spiritual journey. So I wasn't, maybe it could have been 69, but as it turns out, I was right. It was 1970. Now, Marc Sheehan was a teacher that taught all of Ichazo's trainings. But in this most recent letter, he said to me, I think Marianne is best qualified to answer your questions. Now, why was she the most qualified? Because she actually was in Arica. She was one of the first seekers in Arica, Chile. So she got Ichazo's information. But those of you that are interested, the last book is called The 9 Constituents. But you have to be an Arica School current member to get it. And Marc was no longer kind of up to date. He said the last time he had been to an intensive with Ichazo was 2005, maybe 2010. Well, 2005 is when David and I went with him to Ichazo's intensive. So maybe he didn't go after that. So what he felt was meaningful is that he liked the way I honored Ichazo, Naranjo, and the other teachers. And as a result, valued what I was doing, whereas most teachers were the enemy to not understanding the original intention of the work with Ichazo. And it was all about the instincts. So his partner and ex-wife taught those trainings. So it's, here you can see this is back in November where he's saying, Marc Scott answered most of your questions. She was in the 10-month Chile group that began July of 1970 in Arica. So now we even have a month. And then he was telling me that he and Marianne taught 17 of the 40-day trainings. And that was the major intensive 9 hypergnostic systems and many of the 2-week domains of consciousness training. So these are his terminology for his specific trainings. And someone serious about the work with what later became Arica, the school, based on that first experience in Arica, Chile, would teach these. So it would be like, now that you know about Tritype, for example, would you really undo that in your mind? Probably not. Well, that's basically what was happening. So Marc in particular attended the first training, gave the first training in San Francisco in 1972. And he said the theory of the instincts were taught then, the fixations only after that training. So now we're getting more information. So the details of the fixations came after 1972. Now we're overlapping with Naranjo, where he began teaching in 1971. And if we look at what Naranjo has said, or said a few years ago, is he said that actually he'd filled in most of the terminology that Ichazo used. So they were a team, even though it was confusing because periodically Ichazo would call Naranjo a mythomaniac. That's just a great term, a mythomaniac. And Naranjo felt that he did this because he was his teacher. So in 1996, Naranjo still felt that Ichazo was his teacher, and that part of his growing edge as a social 5 was to not need all that affirmation. And who just thought it was challenging him on his narcissism. Well, I thought, wow, okay. Then it doesn't bother you. And he said, no, because it helps me grow. And then he answered many more questions that I'll weave in as we go. But in terms of the actual facts, is that we have a little more information. And another thing Marc said was that Oscar has done a great job keeping the faith from the faithful. And what did he mean by that? He said that Ichazo was very secretive. Now, Marc happened to have, papers on papers on papers on every aspect of Ichazo's work, because he taught the domains of consciousness in the 40-day training. Yet, according to those that were still attending up until his death just recently, we're still getting additional nuances. And it's more about the whole scheme and not the Enneagram's only a small part of it in many ways. It's all about your becoming aware. It's about waking up. So the reason Marc thinks it would be great if people knew about that, they would see the importance of each aspect and not change it. So he was saying that the Tryfix was a training introduced about 15 years ago. So as a training, 15 years ago. Now, Ichazo is, or was, calling Tryfix just the 3 centers. And then later said, you have a fixation in each center. He never did the whole type, which is why the people from Arica asked me if I would use a different word so he could hang on to the word Tryfix, because they felt that the internet and everything that David and I were doing with the tests and posting on Tryfix were going to dilute what he wanted to hold on to. He didn't want it in the common terminology. He wanted it to be associated with him. And even though I always gave attribution every single time I taught, I thought, well, okay, I learned about Tryfix apparently the same time as Ichazo was saying, yeah, we have 3 fixations, not just 1, because mine began 25 years ago. But Ichazo's work with all of this the thinking about all these things began in 1970. So if you go back 15 years ago, you can see how we were doing this independent of one another and then came up with different pieces. Now, according to Marc, there's no one that has the any information on the instincts that or the Tryfix from Ichazo that was current. That he didn't go into that specifically. But I just put these dates out here and we can challenge them. If there's more that's released, like if his book ever does come out, I hope it does. Even though it was a small print, it could be a PDF and would be very, very meaningful to those of us that want the whole picture. But I have to say that there are really 3 different Enneagrams now. There's Ichazo's Enneagram, Naranjo's Enneagram, and then those that came for those that studied under Naranjo or Kathy Spieth, his girlfriend, or Helen Palmer, they're all one line. And then those that came out of the Robert Oakes, Father Robert Oakes from Loyola, their Enneagram, because they describe the types differently. Now, why is that? Well, we just discussed why Ichazo used the word instincts and why Naranjo used the word subtypes and why Don and Russ, when they finally added the instincts, used the word variance. They're all very logical reasons if you come to understand that. But the people, I call them east of the divide, that learned the Enneagram through the Catholic pipeline, the way Don did, and Ted and Kathy did, and other great teachers, they did not have instincts. They only had the types. So as I've mentioned in other classes, they had to kind of figure out someone's type. And if you're really emotional, you were made a 4 or a 2. So many 8s that were emotional were put into 4 and 2. Now, I think it was still tri-type and they were really onto something. But if you don't have the instincts, it's not going to explain your focus. So what Marc went on to say was that he also did the facial proto-analysis, and I remember that. And, regarding the mother, father, peers, and siblings, when you were 5 years old, is what he meant to say, I'm sure. Did you see your mother as domineering, disinterested, or distant? And did you see your father as domineering, disinterested, or critical, distant and critical? And then did you see your siblings as domineering, disinterested, and critical? It's really great, and it's what I want to use for our breakout group together. In fact, I could put you guys all together. Let me just finish this board, and then I can have you do this now, and then we'll go into the rest. Because I think you need to understand how he saw the instincts before we can move into Naranjo's instincts. So you can see how this would have been too much if I did this in the first part of the trainings. You're trying to really refine the instincts, but I'm telling you about history and Ichazo's instincts and Naranjo's and what's the different, what's the same. You kind of have to know the history. So Marc also talked about the proto-analysis, and I had learned that, so it was great fun talking to him about that. It was great to have lived on Maui for a year either way. And he found then that he could figure out through observation and elimination what someone's Tryfix was, well, that's exactly what we're doing. And I'm teaching you how to do. What key things are really important? And he did say not always. And often you see the 369, sometimes the 147. And he was surprised that I saw his Tryfix in 2005. And so that would have been 15 years ago. Actually, I'm just thinking about that. Because people didn't know about Tryfix. He had just learned it. And the fact that I could see it on the questionnaire, which he says down here, your cards, by the way, he's referring to my old and new cards. He loves the cards. But he was really impressed by the one-page questionnaire. So for those of you that did Enneastyle, you know why he was impressed by it, because it captures words, not just of the types, but of the instincts as well. So he really liked the class in Paia, where at first he's going, wait, you're not teaching it right. Because when I started teaching about the centers, he goes, no, it's mother, father, siblings. And I said, yeah, I know that, but this is kind of like a different look at the centers. And he said, but he was going to be incognito. He said, but I taught the 40-day trainings in the domains of consciousness. And I said, okay, but just hear me out, and then we'll go to what you're saying. And if I don't cover it, by all means. And he had brought his kind of co-workers. He had a real estate company on Maui, and he'd brought them in to learn the Enneagram. And you know what it's like if you really know something well and you want other people to know it, but it's almost better to take them to someone totally different that's going to tell them what you want them to know. So that's what he was trying to do. Have them attend our workshop on the Enneagram so that they get fired up about their type.